Welcome to Drinks with Defenders. I'm Addie B. Plate.
And I'm Kayla Murphy. We're two law school friends turned criminal defense attorneys turned podcast hosts.
We're here in this space because we now work in separate offices and miss collaborating with each other.
We've been talking about creating a podcast for years where we talk about the complexities of the criminal justice system, the aspects of it that we grapple with, and the importance of what we do.
At the end of a long work week, we want to sit down, have a drink with each other, and talk about the rabbit holes of criminal defense, just like we always have. So let's get into it. Cheers!
Welcome to Drinks with Defenders. If you're new here, my name is Kayla Murphy, and my co-host is Addie B. Plate. We are two full-time criminal defense attorneys located in the U.S. This is our podcast where we talk about topics pertaining to the U.S. legal system.
A little housekeeping before we jump in. We have some new patrons of the podcast this week, my friends Shane and Jillian. I know Shane from my time working up in Northern Idaho. He's a good friend of mine. And my friend Jillian, I actually met while I was in law school. So if any of our listeners are still in the Eugene area, she's an esthetician. Check out her business, Face Forward Aesthetics. This is not a paid advertisement, and she did not support this podcast for me to give her a plug. This is just me saying that is how I met her. She was my esthetician through law school. She's a fantastic person, and she's really good at her job. And because she's supporting this podcast and supported me as a friend, as somebody that I saw in law school, this is me supporting her business. So give it up for them. I really appreciate their support and love as we launched our first episode. So thank you guys. And we'll share more information about our Patreon with the rest of you in just a few moments. Also, we're on all of the socials: Instagram, Facebook, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, Audible, YouTube, iHeartRadio, Deezer, Podbean, and even Samsung. I know that was an exhaustive list, but you can find us there. So keep an eye out on your favorite social media to see what we're doing and find out what's going on with the podcast. Aside from that, the best way to get a hold of us is at our email address, which is drinkswithdefenders@gmail.com.
Addie.
What's up, girl?
What's up?
You tell me.
We got here tonight. We're here.
I know.
And I think that for all of us, for the whole team, that's a feat. Is Mercury in retrograde or something?
Honestly, it might be. It feels like it is. I feel like we do this thing. We should be honest with our listeners. Sometimes I call you before we get on the podcast to just kind of try to have a little bit of peace with just my friend before we talk about our jobs. And so I called you tonight before we hopped on this, and I was like, dude. And you were on the other end of the phone and you were like, dude, and you didn't even want to talk. You just wanted to listen to your TikTok. I think you were wanting to just calm down with TikTok, which is super fair. And I was like, shit. Okay. So I took a bubble bath. I poured myself a drink.
God.
I took a 10-minute bubble bath. It was short and sweet, but it was enough to kind of decompress. I think we're pretty honest on here about sometimes we have bad days in court. Today was one of those days for me. I covered a case for someone in my office, and it just felt like 3 months in one court hearing. And so that was the day. I think that, that happens sometimes. I also have a few cases that just seem to be sucking the life out of me. And that's just an honest take on this job. So I guess that's what's going on in the working world. What's up with you?
Well, so about the hearing, did you think it would be a 30-second situation and it turned into a half an hour long courtroom drama? What happened?
It was so much worse than that. I thought it was going to be just we go up to counsel table, we are entering denials, we're setting it out for evidentiary, boom, boom, done. And that is not what happened. It turned into this whole other issue regarding bond, custody, all sorts of stuff. And I was just like, how did we get here? And of course, it had to get pushed to the end of the docket to keep continuing with what we were
God.
doing because it just was this evolving thing. And the outcome of it was not at all on anyone's radar. Also, there was just some procedurally weird things. And the assigned attorney happened to be also in the same courthouse, but she was in a different courtroom. And so I went and plucked her from the courtroom she was in to just be like, dude, this is your case. What do you want me to do? And so that's the reality of being a public defender. It's a lot of just on your feet scrambling and things that you're not really prepared for. I feel like if you want to be a good PD, you really need to have at least some background in improv. Like, I don't know, just seeming not awkward and going with it. So how about you?
Yeah, man. Number one, I totally agree. You got to be good at thinking on your feet because it's like sometimes your client, shows
Right.
up or doesn't show
Doesn't
up
show
or
up.
whatever, right? It's like,
You have to just poker face and just and also like I don't know if this happens in Washington, but we're not really obligated to give information about our clients like not appearing, right? And they of course ask. And so you're kind of like having to just say, I don't have any information to give to the court at this time. And so that's always fun too. That's not what happens
yeah,
today, but that happens a lot. So but
yeah.
honestly, I was thinking, and I don't want to cut you off from your catch up, but I had two questions when I was in the car driving to and from court today that I wanted to ask you. And they're related to cases that I'm facing right now. And I was like, you know what? I've never had the experience of just asking Kayla on this podcast for some senior attorney advice in terms of like my own experience.
Senior, LOL.
You're senior to
2
me.
years.
And so I
girl.
wanted to just ask you just questions. I mean, they're not really advice, just like questions about your experience with two things that I have found particularly challenging in the last couple of weeks. The first being, say you're negotiating with a prosecutor and the prosecutor tells you no the first time. And then you have to, your client isn't wanting to go with a prosecutor's recommendations. You reached out to them, they said no. You go back to your client with that information and your client's like, no, you got to go back to that prosecutor and tell them what's up and argue and advocate for me. What is your strategy with that? Because for me, I find myself being like, okay, I'm going to go back through discovery and try to find something to point out to this prosecutor. Or as was this recent case, I was like, no, I'm going to tell this prosecutor that we're going to watch the video together. And that way they're going to be sitting next to me and I can point out the things that I want to point out. And I felt like maybe that was a bold move. And I wasn't sure if you have ever just straight up told a prosecutor, like, I don't think you're seeing what I'm seeing. Let's watch this together. So, what's your strategy with something like that? Because I felt very uncomfortable, but I didn't know what else to do.
That's very creative. And, being a good defense attorney is about creativity. And so I like it. I like your spunk.
Oh my gosh.
No, I like it. Yeah, dude, it's tricky. I mean, I guess generally speaking, I will like look through the case and try to find any potential issues that I put in my quote unquote like negotiations basket, right? Any
Right.
like good facts for us, any like potential like 3-6 issues like search and seizure, right? Or 3-5 issues like Miranda problems.
Anything suppression or like,
For sure. And I'll talk to my client, figure out what their goals are and what realistic, but also like positive resolution would look like that we think we could try to negotiate. And then I email the prosecutor usually and I'm like, hey, what's up? Here are some issues, some potential motion issues, like give us X, Y, and Z. And in exchange, you'll get, potentially a speedy resolution to the case. And you won't have to spend a bunch of time responding to my emotion and litigating all these issues. And we all win, right? We've resolved the case. It's fair resolution. My client's happy. You're happy. We can all go home. As far as when the prosecutor tells you no, I mean, you do have like tools in your toolbox, right? Like you
Right.
could file a motion, you could make them work, you could set the case for trial.
Right.
And sometimes they just don't take you seriously. And maybe you need to actually write the motion and then attach it to an email and be like, what up, dude? I'm about to file this. Do you want to play ball, or do you want to like drag this out and work an extra, 4 hours this week responding to this and appearing and arguing at the hearing and having to get your officer witness prepared, et cetera, et cetera. Like the prosecutor has like additional obligations that they have to worry about.
Right.
So, it is their burden.
Any good criminal defense attorney, as soon as you get a case, you are trying to figure out if it's a good trial case first and foremost. And then, you don't get to make the determination of going to trial. That's your client's choice. But you're kind of thinking about, okay, what's good about my case? What's bad about my case? Those type of things. In this particular case, I felt like, it wasn't a terrible trial case. It's not a great trial case. But it was more just like, give us an offer that's more reasonable because my client is wanting to resolve. I feel like it was a little bit of an overcharge. I mean, sure, if you want to go for that charge, we would have to fight it in a motion way, but it was just like, give a more reasonable offer. And based on your offer, it just seems like if we were both to watch the video and have just an honest discussion about really something that came down to like 20 seconds, we would be at a place to just kind of come to the negotiating table a little bit more reasonably. And that didn't happen. And I reached out to the prosecutor and just kind of pointed out the strengths to my case, I felt like, and arguments for a more reasonable offer. And then I got kind of a no back. And then I was like, okay. And I chewed on it and I was like, I don't want to send a condescending email back, but like my client doesn't like this offer. We will request for this to be continued if the offer doesn't get changed and it's just going to be drug out. I think at this point, just the best thing for, it seemed like everybody was to just continue negotiations in a more reasonable way. And so I was like, okay, the best thing I can think of is just like us watching the video together so that I can just point out things out, because you're also doing like the email back and forth with the prosecutor or catching them in the courthouse or whatever. And I didn't want to like catch this person by surprise. In exchange for that, my efforts of emailing the prosecutor and asking us to watch the video together, I got a more reasonable offer. So I got what I wanted, but it just felt like, how do other people approach this? So I don't know. I just thought it was strange, but I appreciate your thoughts on it. I found myself in a little bit of an uncomfortable situation. I wasn't sure what other people would do. So, or at least outside of my office, right? I talked to other people in my office about it, but that was the solution I came up with.
I think it also depends on your personal style as an attorney,
right?
And what's authentic to you, and also who you're dealing with, right? Like some prosecutors maybe are like less worried about responding to emotion because that's their strong suit. And so they really don't care. Where others are like, dude, I do not have the time for this shit. And so let's just play ball.
Right.
So just.
And then my second question to you, and maybe this is like, I don't want to like poke the bear because it's a little bit of a heavy question, but I was thinking, we spend, our job is so interesting. You spend a lot of it in the courtroom and you spend a lot of it at your desk, just going through like the case and discovery and body camera footage and dash camera footage and, lab reports, whatever it may be. And I was like thinking about it and I was like, okay, every time I get a new case and I go through discovery, there's different things that I don't enjoy looking at in terms of just like, it's hard. It's a hard part about our job. Or it's just boring to me, or I'm having to like teach myself something because I don't have the vocabulary for what I'm looking at. There's different things that are hard about just reviewing discovery. And in thinking about that, I was like, I wonder what Kayla's position is on what is the thing that is hardest for you when you come across in a discovery. Like, is it something that you just don't understand what it is? Is it something that just shocks you in body camera footage? And maybe that's a loaded question, but for me, I was thinking about like, and I think it relates to tonight's topic a little bit, but anytime I get body camera footage and I feel like law enforcement is using really, I don't know what the right word is, but tricky questioning where it feels like they just get to lie to our clients to get our clients
Well, they do.
to,
And they can.
well, we know that. Yes. And so, but it just evokes this like visceral response where I just feel so bad because I think sometimes, our clients as defendants are painted in this light of being like dishonest people who like break the law or whatever. And then to watch a law enforcement officer lie to them to get our client to
And
be
bully
honest,
them
quote
and be
unquote honest.
fucking dicks sometimes,
Yes,
dude.
yes.
I
And
hate
get them
that
to be,
shit for no
it
reason.
makes me so angry. And I was just like,
Yes.
okay. And and I don't want to like be that person that's like, oh, this happens all the time, but it happens a lot. And so you get to watch like law enforcement lie so they get your client to admit to something. And usually it's in the form of like, just being honest will help your case. And when that specific thing is said, I said, okay, my office is on the third floor of a building. I want to throw my computer out of the window every time. I'm like,
yeah.
And so I just was wondering, other than that, what is like your pet peeve in discovery? Like something that just makes you have a response, if there is anything.
Well, I completely agree with you. Like, there are definitely like a lot of good cops who really care, but the
Right.
longer you practice in a particular community, the more you see like, this is the cop who's just fucking rude to people for no reason, who like
Yeah.
makes assertions and reports that are kind of sketchy. It's like, is that what you saw? Because that's not what the video shows or you know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
that kind of shit really pisses me off.
I guess I knew you were going to be on the same page as me. So it's a little validating, but I was just wondering if you had
that fucking pisses me off. But I mean, in a way, it kind of is like, oh, you want to play ball, motherfucker? Let's play ball. And then I'll like, you know what I mean? Go through it with like, even if possible, like more of a fine tooth comb, like trying to find every single mistake, every single thing I can do to destroy their case. Like, you were so confident. You were such a fucking dick. You like for no reason, like you're done.
Let's just cross-examine you, baby. Let's go.
I hate that shit. Like that like inspires me. Like I get fueled on rage. I am.
Well, see, okay. I guess we're on the same page. I mean, thank God, because sometimes I'm just sitting there and I'm just like, do other people feel this way? So
it's wild,
thank you
dude.
You're not wrong.
It's wild. Okay.
On that note.
So, yeah, I don't know. My little day, I'll keep it short. Like, whatever. I just had like a conflict with a prosecutor, and it's just like, I was already just so like on edge because I've been so fucking anxious about these new felony cases.
Anxious?
I know.
Angry
and so
at a prosecutor? No
I'm
way.
like this close to the edge, dude. And it's like, you're freaking pushing me. So yeah. But I'm coming down now. You know, the 3-siders may have helped. Yeah, I'm glad. I'm happy to be here with you guys. It's fine. It's going to be fine. Yeah, this job can just be intense, dude. It's like, it's just a lot of human suffering. It's a lot of conflict. It's a lot of stress. And
it is a lot of stress. And wearing other people's stress.
On that note,
what are we drinking tonight?
Yeah, really. Well,
matters apparently.
Listen, we clearly I wouldn't say we have our shit together per se tonight, but the requirement was at least 2 drinks because this is our DUI episode.
So the requirement was, we don't care what you drink, as long as you drink a lot of it. I am drinking a spiked coffee because I am a tired girly at the end of the day. So I'm one of those people that could drink caffeine and still go to bed at a normal time. So I'm drinking an iced coffee. I felt like if I elevated it and put it in a cocktail glass, I would feel a little bit more festive. So I'm drinking coffee that's spiked with Kahlua. I love a Kahlua moment. So I poured a lot of Kahlua and a lot of coffee and called it good. What about you, Kayla? What are you drinking?
I am drinking a 2 Towns Cider House Cosmic Crisp. It is 8% alcohol per can.
What flavor is it?
It's just the OG Imperial style apple. It's delightful. I'm usually more of a hard seltzer kind of gal, but today was a day. So it's like, you know what?
She's here.
We need some hot Cheetos. We need some cider. Yeah. DUI. Why, Addie? Why are there so many DUIs? Do you have a lot of DUIs?
I do. They're a big part of misdemeanor practice. I feel like most of my caseload is, if I were to break my caseload into just the typical groupings, it's like driving offenses and like misdemeanor drug offenses. So like most of my cases, every once in a while, I have like a battery or something like that, right? But as a new attorney, I have a lot of like driving without privileges, which sometimes are related to a past DUI, or like somebody's license being suspended. So there's maybe a DUI kind of going on in the background, or like a shadow DUI, I guess. And then, or, a DUI, and then there's gradations of DUIs, which we should talk about. And then, paraphernalia charges, marijuana charges, that type of stuff. So that's like the biggest portion of my caseload is probably those two buckets. And DUIs are interesting because there's a lot of moving pieces in terms of they're really fact specific in terms of like building your case. If you want to take it to trial, what's going on with the person's driving record. If it's a misdemeanor DUI, if it's a first offense, if it's a second offense, if it's an excessive BAC, if you're then into felony territory DUIs, like there's a lot to unpack with understanding DUIs. And then they have this really fun undertone. And I say fun kind of facetiously. They have a fun undertone of like science kind of, and like, police standard operating procedures. And then there's like, drug recognition. Oh, and then there's also drug DUIs. So sometimes they're not even like just related to alcohol. And then drug DUIs have a bunch of their own categories too, because it's like, is it a prescription drug? Is it a recreational drug? Is it, what's going on there? And the person, you pulled over the person, if it's, a quote unquote drug DUI, did they know that the person was like, did they suspect that the person was under the influence of drugs, or did they originally think the person was under the influence of alcohol? There's just a lot with DUIs, and they're this big spider web, and I feel like they'll never go away. As long as I'm a criminal defense attorney, I will be taking DUI cases to the day I no longer practice or die. I guess whichever sooner, but they're going to stay with me.
Practice will likely kill you. Yeah, dude. I feel ya. I thought that a fun way to kind of structure this conversation and how a typical DUI investigation and case plays out would be to use a case as an example. So you looked at the one of Lindsay Lohan's DUIs.
I didn't really. So the fun thing about Lindsay Lohan, and I want to kind of back up in terms of like why we picked Lindsay Lohan and just kind of the angle I wanted to take with it. So the thing, and it's not, because I think we should after that kind of go through what happens with like a DUI investigation.
For sure.
But the Lindsay Lohan case is really interesting in terms of, first and foremost, I think when a lot of people think celebrity DUIs, she comes to mind because her DUI case, I think it was from 2007, got extremely drug out. She had like constant arrests, different bail settings, and it just kind of paints this really, I think, full picture in terms of like how long these cases can go. And then just people like, say you resolve your DUI case for whatever reason, you can get like hailed back into court or taken back into custody. Her case is a little bit less of the reality in terms of how some of it played out, though, because for our clients, if they're brought into custody, they'll actually usually serve more time than just like a couple hours. Her case was really interesting because a lot of the times when she got taken back into custody, she was released for quote unquote overcrowding issues in, I believe, the California jail system, which is kind of crazy when you think about it, because most jails have overcrowding issues. And think about the last time a client, other than maybe COVID, got released for overcrowding. That doesn't really happen in the same way that it would happen for like a celebrity. So I think it maybe points to a little bit of I don't want to say necessarily privilege, but privilege and financial resources and all of these things that I think kind of played out in her outcome. So I found this fun little article from E! News, of course, and it talks about kind of the timeline of what happened to her case. And I just wanted to point out some of the highlights in terms of what's common in what we see.
Can I pause you for a sec, Addie?
Yeah, of course you can.
I was thinking that this might be a good way to kind of like illustrate how each of the steps of a DUI investigation, prosecution, and resolution kind of play out. So maybe we could go in order of just like what happened. Like, does the article talk about why she was stopped?
Kind of. So it starts with in May of 2007, she was charged with a DUI offense and possession of cocaine after losing control of her Mercedes. And they said in a booze-fueled car wreck in Beverly Hills. So I believe there was an accident. So that was kind of the start of it. So it wasn't like they were investigating for some of the other things you see, such as like driving pattern or anything like that. But so there was an accident. Sometimes that happens. And then, the person who's involved in the accident, they have to make a determination if they think that substances were involved. And that seemed to be kind of what happened with her case.
Yeah. I mean, so Addie, I would love to get your take, but when I do a DUI review, I try to be systematic about it. And the more that I learn about DUIs, the more things I learn that I need to check. Mm-hmm. And for that reason, at first, I really hated DUIs. I felt like they were just really complex. And I actually had a felony attorney tell me once, and he's been practicing for a long time, that when I was like really scared of felonies, he was saying, dude, like if you've handled DUIs, like those are probably straight up like one of the most complex cases you can handle, like in district court or superior court. District court is where misdemeanors and gross misdemeanors are. Superior court is where felony cases would be heard. So yeah, he was basically saying like they're the most tricky. And yeah, there's a lot to check, but like once you know what to check, it can kind of be a little bit fun. I kind of think of it as like, I feel like a teacher, like grading. You know what I mean? Like, did you do this? Did you do this? No, you didn't. You fucking didn't. And it's like, I'm a teacher that like gets a kick out of like you failing, like you as the officer giving me things to negotiate with and get my client a better deal,
Right.
So typically when I'm reading a report for a DUI, the first thing I do is I look at like, okay, why did the cop initiate contact?
Right.
So for example, if, you didn't turn your turning signal on 50 feet prior to the turn, is that why they stopped you? Or did you, were you driving erratically? Or like Lindsay, was it like more of a community caretaking thing where there was an accident and that's why there was police contact? So yeah, sounds legit. Okay. So then what happens? Does it talk at all about like the cop's observations or if she did like field sobriety tests?
So I found a different article, and this is from the Los Angeles Times. And it's an article that says Lohan is arrested in suspected DUI crash. It talks about, again, the Mercedes crash in Beverly Hills. It says she was slightly injured after she lost control of her car traveling west on Sunset Boulevard at about 5:30 in the morning. The car ended up striking a curb and a shrubbery along Foothill Road. 2 other people in the Mercedes, I guess she was driving their other passengers, they were not hurt. And then officers responded to the 911 call. I think she fled the scene and they tracked her down and arrested her at the hospital because I think
that is so funny.
I think she was taken. It says she left the scene of the crash and was taken by an unidentified associate to the hospital. So I think law enforcement made contact with her at the hospital, which is sometimes,
she fled.
Well, I don't know like who took her to the hospital, but she was taken to the hospital. And then law enforcement made contact with the driver at the hospital, which, I would be so curious with this case too, because it's like, obviously law enforcement go to the scene. What was said by the 2 passengers?
And Lindsay went that way. Like, I don't fucking, so funny.
You know what I mean? From her defense perspective, you're having to figure out like, okay, how do they identify her as the driver? It's probably based on information that was given from the 2
Catty Aaron's on the move. That's so funny, Christy.
She's moving.
Law clerk.
She's booking it. And
The
so
mean girl.
she leaves. And
That
also,
mean
like,
girl.
who took her to the hospital? Like, I want to know. But so they make contact with her at the hospital. And of course, like, we don't know a lot of information about, I'm sure a lot of this was probably kept pretty hush.
Yeah, Lindsay's people did not want this shit to get out.
And it's not like a lot of people, I mean, think about our clients, like a typical DUI. It's not like the press knows a lot of facts that are specific to the contact that was made, even if a crash was involved. So like I've had, I know
Right.
of DUI cases where a crash was involved, and it's not like a lot of information was given to the press in terms of like what went on with the accident. So
I wonder if her blood was taken or if she did the breathalyzer down at the station.
oh, I'm gonna bet that she probably had well, here's the other thing.
They had to have gotten a warrant for blood for sure.
They had to have, and I'm sure that were already like, I mean, we have cases. I've seen cases where clients of ours, there's an accident, a citizen called 911. Maybe law enforcement makes initial contact, but then an ambulance arrives and the ambulance takes them to the hospital, and then law enforcement circles back at the hospital and then does a blood draw there or gets the blood alcohol concentration from the hospital. So I'm sure, I mean, I don't want to speculate too much because of course, I don't know, but I'm assuming they obtained her BAC one way or the other. But can you imagine if she's doing like a breathalyzer in the hospital, just like, poor girl. We don't know all the facts about her arrest and investigation in terms of knowing that she was actually under the influence.
Well, I mean, that's fair. That's a good jumping off point. So typically after I analyze why the person was stopped, for example, if they were stopped for like a traffic infraction, for example, I would then analyze whether or not the cop had reasonable suspicion to expand the scope of his investigation to include a DUI, right? Because they're not able to expand the duration or scope of their investigation or the stop without reasonable suspicion, right? And if it's just a traffic infraction, like homeboy is supposed to just like get that business done and get you on your way. And if they want to like try to get you for a DUI, they need to have that reasonable suspicion.
Oh, I was going to say, I filed a really interesting motion to suppress where a couple of weeks ago where I like laid that argument out where it's like, okay, you pull this person over for a traffic infraction, and then you talk about, okay, at the point you made contact, there was no reasonable suspicion to believe that this person was under the influence of alcohol, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there has to be indicators for that. So, and I don't want to, maybe that's where you're going.
Let's talk about some of those, right? So what have you seen?
I think in our county, police always say, especially like in their report or testifying, they'll talk about glassy or bloodshot eyes. They'll talk about the odor of alcohol.
100%.
They'll talk about if there is, Clark just put in the chat that there was a breathalyzer done at the jail. That would be so fascinating to see. I don't know if I've ever seen camera footage of a client doing the breathalyzer at the jail.
Really?
And it says in the article,
we're gonna have to
I don't think I've seen it yet.
This because
it's on WIS News, and it says that she blew a 0.12, which is of course over the legal limit, right? It's not terrible, but
it's not like disgustingly over the legal limit,
Yeah, and the legal limit is 0.08.
Yeah,
but so it's not terrible. So she
did have cocaine in her pocket, right?
I believe she had cocaine on her,
a little crossfaded. Okay.
Well, we don't know if she was
cancels
using
alcohol.
Just because there was cocaine on her doesn't mean that she had used cocaine, Kayla, as any good criminal defense attorney would know.
You're right. God damn it. So we're freaking friends pants.
3 ciders in, and we're speculating pants. So she had cocaine possession, which she was charged for. So, but back to the indicators of alcohol, sometimes it's common. They'll say, flag reasonable suspicion if there's like empty bottles in the car.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's things that they sometimes cite, which you get to argue are not indicators, like speeding is not an indicator for being under the influence of alcohol. They'll say swerving, but like that's,
it needs to be like prolonged.
Right. Or delayed, like signaling or something like that. Those are things that they usually hinge on. Do you have any other of the big ones? I think in my like practice, odor of alcohol and something to do with the eyes is usually the two biggest.
For sure.
Oh,
Let's
Clark
see
says
here.
following too close. And following too close.
That's Christy.
Oh, Christy, why did I say Clark? Christy says following too close. Following too close is interesting because I don't want to like speculate on that because falling too close is they're going to make the argument that it's delayed reaction, right? And so I would love to fight that, but because some people just follow too close anyways, right? It depends on if you're falling too close while driving, are you speeding? If you're falling too close while like maybe like at an intersection, is that different? You're like having a delayed braking reaction. I think those might be two different things. Kayla, you probably know more about this, but there's different indicators for alcohol impairment and drug impairment.
Mm-hmm.
For drug impairment, it seems like maybe some of the delayed reaction in terms of like braking and stuff like that seems to be most of the cases that I see where they're arguing like an indicator or maybe a cause of an accident being like braking or not braking in time points. My understanding is more to drug impairment, but I don't want to be, I'm definitely not the expert in that. So what's your take on following too closely or like delayed braking?
So I would love to talk about this in conjunction with drug DUIs, but let's just, if we may, back up one step here. So we talked about like how we typically look at our DUIs and work the cases, right? Did they have a legit reason to stop? Did they have reasonable suspicion to expand the scope of the stop?
Reasonable, articulable suspicion.
Thank you. Yes. And then we would want to determine if they had like probable cause to like actually arrest them for the DUI, right? Like alcohol or otherwise. So typically when police are articulating probable cause for arresting somebody for a DUI, they need to show two things. Number one, some kind of evidence of consumption, right, of drugs or alcohol. And two, some kind of like
impairment,
like diminished capacities. Exactly. Like impairment, like erratic driving, for example, or failed field sobriety tests.
Or wide turns or whatever it may be.
Totally. So let's talk about like field sobriety tests.
Oh my gosh.
Right? Like I knew you'd have a lot to say.
Field sobriety tests. And I don't know if you know this, but I went to this training in the fall that we had. It was interesting. So we had a training for criminal defense attorneys in Idaho, and they had like a fall one in the town that I live in. And two people from my office did a whole entire presentation on DUI investigations. And field sobriety tests are extremely controversial because I think at first there were over 16 tests that they would administer to somebody that had a DUI. And then there was this big report that was done. And then I think it brought it down to like 6. And then it eventually got dwindled down to the 3 that we know. So it was fun for a while because criminal defense attorneys kind of got to like attack some of the like pseudoscience behind some of the other SFSTs, which would be things like, tracing a pencil or stuff like that. Those are not used in the same way anymore. And now we've landed on horizontal gaze nystagmus, the one leg stand, and the walk and turn. And then those work essentially, and this is probably where you're going to go, you get indicators and kind of like scored on each of those tests. Basically, the bigger picture is like they score you on those tests. If you're deemed to have failed the SFST, then they will administer a breathalyzer test. Usually there has to be like a 15-minute wait period. Then they breathalyze you. You can't burp or anything. And then it goes on. So we can go back to the SFSTs. There's the 3 we've landed on, just a little bit of historical context. It was kind of crazy that they were allowed to just do all of these other additional testing on people. So DUI investigations used to be even more drawn out than they are. Like if people now get pulled over for a DUI, they can be on the side of the road going through a series of tests with an officer for a while. And I don't know how it works in your county, Kayla, but I think in my experience, they do, at least the ones I've watched, they do the HDN first. Then I think the walk and turn and the one leg stand, but I might have those two mixed up. And the HGN is really the most important one. So it makes, in my opinion, and so it makes sense for them to start with that. I think that the state and the police would kind of be not doing the investigation. They're aiding themselves by starting with that, in my opinion.
So HGN stands for horizontal gaze nystagmus. And essentially what that is the officer is checking your eyes for essentially an involuntary flicker or twitch that supposedly happens in your eyes when you have consumed alcohol. So this one's kind of interesting. There are multiple indicators, like they will look at horizontal nystagmus. So they will have you follow a stimuli left to right. And they'll also look for vertical gaze nystagmus, which is looking up and down. Thinking, kind of circling back to something I mentioned earlier, where I kind of enjoy like trying to see if they like checked all of these little boxes. Field sobriety tests are particularly fun for me because there are so many rules and steps that they have to take in order for the field sobriety test to be considered reliable, right? In order to establish probable cause. For the horizontal vertical gaze nystagmus test, for example, one of the indicators is that there was nystagmus, so that involuntary twitching at quote unquote maximum deviation. And that's where they're holding the stimuli at the furthest to the side that they can, right? Where your eyes can follow it. And one of the things that I recently learned is that they have to hold it there for a full 4 seconds in order for them to say that it was distinct and sustained. So that's a, fun thing when you're watching the body cam footage to like make sure they did that for this test to be legit.
Can we talk more about HGN real quickly?
Oh yeah, please.
Backing up in terms of why I said that I think it's in law enforcement's best interest to start with the HGN is because HGN is deemed as like the most accurate of the SFSTs.
Mm-hmm.
It has a reported percentage of being 77% accurate. So oftentimes you'll hear like the eyes don't lie. As you said, Kayla, nystagmus is an involuntary jerking of the eyes. And so it causes the eyes to gaze to the side. This is not something that can be felt by the person who's having it or controlled. Like it's not something you can manipulate with your eyes yourself. It's caused by CNS, so central nervous system depressants like alcohol, inhalants, or dissociative anesthetics. There's 6 possible clues or points. So when I say indicators, that's what I mean. And so they kind of break into 3 categories, which is like the lack of smooth pursuit of your eyes, the distinct and sustained nystagmus at maximum deviation, and the angle of onset prior to 45 degrees. 4 or more clues. So like I said, there's 6 possible clues in the test. 4 or more clues is indicative of impairment. And it's funny because they say that SFSTs are a tool to assist you in seeing visible signs of impairment, but they're not a pass fail. Obviously, we know that they kind of end up being that way at the end, but they're really not supposed to be.
These tests are voluntary. You don't have to do these tests.
Right.
And the cop has to tell you that they're voluntary tests. I mean, whether or not you participate in these is up to you.
HGN can be caused by, there's over 40 different causes of HGN. They're not just caused by a substance. People can have them from a disruption of things like air fluids. So like a biological reason to have one. People can have them from some sort of like pathological diagnosis that they might have. They can also have something from just having like an optimal, like an, I'm going to botch this, but it's like an optokinetic response that they have something wrong with their eyes that causes this phenomenon known as nystagmus. So it's not just related to being under the influence of a substance, but surely, law enforcement uses it as an indicator to point to it. Then, as we know, as defense attorneys, if when maybe you get a case where your client had a nystagmus in their case, then these are things you need to address with them, being like, hey, you had indicators. Do you have any of these other conditions? Maybe administer this test on them when they're sober and see if they have the same phenomenon just normally, if they have like an ophthalmologist issue, if they have any ear issues previously. There's little things that you constantly want to be looking at with your clients. And maybe they have some sort of like eye twitching that you notice just in interacting with them. And then that kind of strengthens your case for challenging the HDN result that they had in their SFST.
Thank you for bringing up that there could be biological reasons behind that phenomenon. That reminds me that I recently learned as well that the police strobe lights on their car can actually induce that phenomenon as well. So if they don't turn those off and they're like administering it and those are in the background.
Because your eye is responding to stimuli in the background like that. And you know, it's funny too, because they're constantly like looking at people's eyes in SFSTs, not just HDN, but they're looking at like pupil dilation and stuff, whether or not they should. It's not like standard to this part of a test, but they'll look at people's eyes and it's like, okay, are you shining a bright light in their face and it's nighttime? Maybe it's daytime and it's snowing. And so it's really bright outside and white. And so people's eyes aren't, you know, dilating the way that they should be. And so these are just little things that are just really interesting in a police report or when you're watching these tests be administered.
Let's talk about the walk and turn and the one leg stand. I think these can kind of be grouped together.
I hate them.
Why?
I think they're dumb. I think a lot of people...
Well, they are for sure dumb.
I think my frustration with the walk and turn specifically is that sometimes I don't think law enforcement gives clear instructions as to what people are supposed to do with the walk and turn.
Well, that's a basis to challenge it.
Well, I know, but it's dumb. And then they just like hang it on the fact that people don't, you know, didn't turn properly or didn't know. And then sometimes like, you know, clients will be like walking and then they'll ask like what they're supposed to do. And then the officers will say, I already told you, I don't get to give you these instructions again, or stuff like that. And I think that that's really unfortunate and dumb. And then the one leg stand, there's all sorts of reasons why people could have poor balance aside from being intoxicated. You know, I played college soccer forever. I have terrible knees. If you were to ask me to stand on one leg after a long time, I'm not sure, depending on how my legs were doing on that day, how well I would do with that. Think about some, you know, potential defendants who maybe have had like a hip replacement or a knee replacement, or maybe the road conditions that they're standing on, or maybe they have arthritis or
totally.
And that's just if a person's totally able-bodied, right? So, and yeah, people might have other medical conditions, like, you know, maybe stuff going on with balance issues, something related to their head, all sorts of stuff could cause these phenomenons of people not being able to stand for long portions of time. And so I just think that it's a really ableist test and it bothers me because then you have to like to challenge it sometimes. You have to point out these other things that sometimes might be sensitive that people have going on with them as to why they're struggling to stand. And like, it's already such an exploitive thing and a vulnerable thing to like share your story. And the system is set up for people to have to like do this dance of being honest with the court, but also not, you know, potentially exposing themselves to like further incriminating statements or anything like that. So it's just hard. Oh yeah, and slurred speech, Clark, to your point, you know, there's other things. Maybe somebody, the original indicator, slurred speech, maybe somebody has some reason for speaking differently than what the officer is used to, and that can be used against them. So yeah, just really ableist tests, but I'll get off my soapbox now, Kayla. You can go back onto what you were talking about. I get so heated with DUIs because it's a rabbit hole, which was what we wanted to do on this podcast. And we're doing it, you know, diving into it. But there's just all these things that are so incredibly frustrating about every little turn and how these cases can go. And the deck is stacked against your clients. Yes, they have fun things to challenge, but there's a million little things that can just get tossed at them. And
I agree.
Frustrating.
I feel you. Yeah. I certainly share your frustration. I mean, technically, in order for the tests to be valid, the cops do have to give the correct instructions, and they are supposed to inquire specifically regarding whether the person has any physical impairments that could impact their ability to perform the tests.
But who's going to tell a cop that?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I that is honestly like not something I had really considered, but you're right. Like that is a vulnerable thing. And people are already like uncomfortable talking to the police, but hopefully they're comfortable enough talking to you as their attorney so that you can communicate to the prosecutor and tell him why the test is not legit and why your client may have failed failed, even if they weren't intoxicated.
So the walk and turn has 68% accuracy, according to the research, the initial research that it's by the NHTSA, which I should know that acronym, but I don't. So I'm just going to give you the acronym.
National Highway Safety
Traffic
Institute?
Safety
Question mark?
Association or
Yes,
something.
I think so.
Probably. Like I said to my point, it's really testing two things. It's testing kind of this like psychological aspect of it. So it's testing your
Like your
ability to
attention.
listen. Yeah, listen,
Mhm.
pay attention, remember things, and pay attention to two different things to like divide your attention. And that presents other challenges too, because like neurodivergent people exist. So like maybe somebody has some attention issues. I would probably struggle with that. As somebody who has ADHD and you're overwhelmed by this experience and there's a lot of stimulus going on and it's just a lot. And so, and I think when you're kind of stressed out, your ability to focus on something is diminished.
100%.
And then the second part of the test is like assessing the physical performance. So the walk and turn is really two tests in one, which a lot of people think it's just like, oh, you're just testing somebody's ability to walk. No, it's like there's a sneaky other test in there too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Good point.
We should talk about the scores for the walk and turn. So there's
Okay.
8 possible clues on the walk and turn. So the first is you can't keep balance during the instructional phase. Second would be starting too soon. Then it goes from there. Stops while walking, does not touch heel to toe on a step, steps off the line, uses your arms for balance, an improper turn, or an incorrect number of steps. So there's a lot going on. Like there's a lot of different instruction in terms of, I guess, the footwork required for these things to do, the amount of steps you're supposed to take, listening, balancing, turning properly. Maybe if you kind of wobble and use your arms, I guess that would be a clue. So, and each clue can only be counted once. So, like if you've wobbled or used your arm once, you only pick up a clue for that once. It's not like you get double counted. So there's 8 possible clues, and then 2 or more clues on this test is indicative of impairment, which is crazy because it's like 2 or more clues on this test is indicative of impairment. So if you get a 6 out of 8, you still technically failed.
Hate that.
Even though they say it's not like based on a fail, doesn't sit quite right.
Yikes. Well, then we've got the one leg stance. There's only a few indicators for that one, right? What's like hopping?
It has 4 possible clues. The one leg stand. First of all, so they say the same research says that the one leg stand is the least accurate. It's at 65% accurate. Again, it's kind of the 2-in-1. It's a psychophysical test. It has 4 possible clues. So swaying while performing the test. Again, using your arms to balance, hopping, as you said, and then putting your foot down on the ground. And this one's even more interesting. 2 or more clues is indicative of impairment. So you only have 4 things you could clue for. And again, each clue can only be scored once. And so the one leg stand as a test, it lasts for only 30 seconds. But it's funny because the NHSTA say that wind, weather, age, weight, and footwear can impact performance on this test.
Yes. Dude, I just recently learned that if you're over it, so the test is not, so this goes both for the walk and turn and the one leg stand, not validated if you're over 50 pounds overweight or if you're wearing heels over 2 inches high.
I see that. That is really, really interesting. And keep in mind too that keeping foot parallel to the ground, looking at foot, and keeping legs straight are not clues. And I think sometimes I've heard, I haven't seen it, but sometimes I've heard that some officers can get upset if a person keeps their legs straight, that they get upset about that. But according to the NHST, it's not a clue to do so. And then it says there's some additional interesting research. It says that persons with a BAC over 0.1 can seldom maintain balance for 30 seconds. So one leg stand, walk and turn, I don't know what to say about them other than I'm not a fan. I think HDNs are really fun because you get to see if they administered the test properly. The way I look at these tests is like the HDN, I want to know if the officer administered the test properly and challenge it based on maybe improper administration of the test. It seems like that's probably the best way to challenge it. or, maybe your client has some other reason for having nystagmus. The other two, it's fun because you kind of get to challenge based on maybe how they perform or how well they did on the test otherwise.
I've had cops mess up too on the instructions for sure.
Really?
Yeah, dude.
That's so interesting. I mean,
You just gotta watch it carefully, especially like with their body cams. That is like the real game changer, because in the report it might say that they did X, Y, and Z, but if you actually like watch the body cam, you'll notice, oh, she didn't actually tell her that she needed to take a series of small steps on the turn, and then noted an incorrect turn as an indicator when homegirl didn't even tell her how to turn. You know what I mean?
right. And then after the conclusion of those three tests, my understanding is that a really important point in the DUI investigation happens, because it's like after the conclusion of those three tests.
Are those all the only tests you have? You don't have the portable breath test?
We do, but I want to get there in a second. My understanding is that after conducting the three tests, the officer must decide whether or not to arrest the client if they have probable cause to believe that they're impaired at that point.
We have the portable breath test as a field sobriety test.
We do too. Like, I know that usually happens afterwards. So we have people. So I don't know how it works in Washington, but my understanding is at that point, you need to make a determination of whether or not you believe the person's impaired. Then you have to go into this breath test, and there's like kind of a waiting period of like 15 minutes. It's interesting because I think sometimes, depending on the officer, they start the clock for the 15-minute waiting period at different points. Some officers wait until the SFSTs are done, and some officers, start at a different point.
Are you talking about a breathalyzer machine like a Draeger down at the station? Or are you talking about just a portable breath test?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's weird. And okay, interesting. And so you're saying like they will say they have probable cause to arrest before administering the portable breath test?
My understanding is that the officer, in order to establish probable cause to continue the investigation, that's kind of the officer needs probable cause to believe a DUI was committed. So, and I think that, if they flunk those, then you go to the breathalyzer. I don't know how somebody could feasibly pass that, and then the officer is being like, I'm still going to breathalyze you. And maybe that's like my poor understanding of the law. And maybe I need to flush that part of the understanding out. But every single thing I've seen where somebody has had a breathalyzer administered to them, they have scored as such on these tests, that then the breathalyzer is the next step. And there has to be a waiting period before they can administer the breathalyzer.
Yeah, I would say in my experience, it's just like the fourth test. They got to get a blank reading on it first.
Do you have a waiting period?
Good question. It might be. I mean, I don't recall. I feel like in order to be compliant with the WAC, the Washington Administrative Code, it needs to be voluntary and they need to have obtained a blank test before. I actually don't think that there is a waiting period. Now, we have the Draeger machine down at the station, which is a different thing. And that happens after the person has been arrested, where they either do the breath test or they, try to get a warrant for their blood. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess let's jump there, right? So the person is arrested, and let's just back up actually for a second, because like just generally speaking, the way that I kind of explain DUIs to my clients, just like simply, is there are two ways for them to get you on a DUI. Number one is for you to be over the per se limit for alcohol or marijuana, 0.08 BAC for alcohol, over 5 nanograms per milliliter or higher of THC in your blood, or cannabis. And then the other way is, even if they can't prove that you are above the legal limit, they can still get you for a DUI if they can show that you were affected by your consumption of drugs or alcohol. And so again, right, ways they can show you were affected by shitty driving, right? Failed field sobriety tests. And so, okay, so let's say you failed the field sobriety test. Maybe you wrongly decided to do those. Maybe you made some admissions to drinking, which you should never do, and you were arrested and you're taken to the station.
Something that's interesting, at least in the cases that I've seen, it's so back to the thing that grinds my gears. So in the cases that I see, they've done these SFSTs, then they have this like waiting period, which is why I'm asking, because this is something that's so interesting. They'll have this waiting period where they say that you can't belch, burp, or vomit. Because then if you do and you have consumed alcohol, that can bring remnants of alcohol to your mouth, which then could affect your performance on a breathalyzer test. So they say we have to observe you for 15 minutes, and the officer must not lose observation of that person's mouth essentially in that period of time before administering the breathalyzer test. And then, as you said, they have to do the test on the machine to make sure that it's configured correctly. And then they administer the test. Usually, in most cases, I believe here, they do 2 blows. A lot of reports will have like, say a person blew like a 0.082 and then like maybe like a 0.086 or whatever. And so a lot of police reports will have like the 2 different results that they had on on the 2 blows. And then, they get arrested, taken to the station, whatever. But what's interesting in Idaho and something that I would love to have another just like take on this by just another Idaho defense attorney that is not in my community up here, but it's so interesting because in those 15 minutes, say the police, the way I understand it, and the reason why it's so interesting to me is at that point, the officer must determine whether or not they are going to arrest, and then they're like pursuing with a breathalyzer. And so what I'm curious is like when the determination of arrest has to be made, because if they're determining that the person's arrested and then they're pursuing with this 15-minute period, are they not in custody? And then if they continue asking questions, that's a whole other mess, right? And sometimes they're in cuffs in those 15 minutes, sometimes they're not. Although handcuffs, as you know, Kayla, are only one of the indicators as to somebody being in custody. It's not like, oh, you have handcuffs on you, you're for sure in custody, or you don't have handcuffs on you, you're for sure not in custody. But it's just interesting. And then sometimes, and I've seen it, officers in those 15-minute periods will then ask if they can search your client's person, your client's car, all of these other things that then maybe the DUI investigation is moving into the direction of looking for other information or other evidence to support this investigation, or maybe something else. I don't know. And is the stop being extended at that point? Kind of no, because you're waiting that 15-minute period. And it's just, you're giving me a look like you do not like this or you're confused by it. And girl, me too.
I just don't understand Idaho. I just don't get it. I mean, for us, portable breath tests aren't admissible in court, right? Like it's just a field sobriety test. What would be admissible in court are the results from the actual Draeger machine down at the station. But that wouldn't happen until after you are arrested. So I don't know.
And maybe that's why too, maybe they then test them down at the station and maybe that's what they would present in court. I have never taken a DUI case to trial, so I don't know how all of that goes. All of the DUI cases I've gotten at different kind of stages and they've ended up resolving. So it's not like we've had to challenge a lot of the results of a breathalyzer test, but it's just odd because they'll usually make them blow on scene and then, they'll arrest them and take them down to the station. And I'm sure they do more testing down there and make them blow down there, or sometimes do a blood draw by a DRE or whatever. Yeah, it's funny because it's like technically there's the 3 SFSTs, maybe the portable breathalyzer is a technical 4th, but the video footage that I've seen when they do the field breathalyzer is that there's like a waiting period.
Well, then you should make the argument that they're under arrest, right?
Well, and Idaho's weird. Idaho has the line between being detained and being in custody in Idaho is so much more confusing to me than the line of being detained and being in custody was in Oregon. I felt like I had a very strong understanding of custody, 4th Amendment jurisprudence, 5th Amendment jurisprudence, living in Oregon. And then to our listeners who are in law school, if you go practice in another state, sometimes this shit gets really confusing. And I am swimming in that. I am like, what is going on with search and seizures, DUI investigations? Where's the line of these things? And that's been like kind of the learning curve for me for the past however many months. But I will just candidly say I've never been more confused as I have been about the lines between just being detained and being in custody than I have been living in this state. Man, it makes me miss Oregon. So do with that what you will.
I want to finish up our discussion by just briefly talking about what happens after you're arrested. So you're arrested, you did the breathalyzer or they got your blood. They know if you have drugs or if you took drugs or if you had alcohol in your system. And then what happens? Well, then your attorney will try to resolve your case. In Washington, we have mandatory minimums for DUIs. Do they have mandatory minimums in Idaho?
Depends on the type of DUI. So, like, are you talking about jail time minimums and then like fine minimums and stuff like that? I think that the consecutive jail time only applies to, I think, excessive. I'm going to botch this. I think excessive DUIs and felony DUIs are second offense. I think first offense DUIs are kind of this weird outlier that we have here. And then it comes with other requirements in terms of the driver's license suspension and stuff like that.
In Washington, even for your first time DUI, it's a mandatory minimum of 1 day in jail, $991 fine. They'll make you do a chemical dependency evaluation, comply with any recommended treatment. You'd be on probation. You'd have to have an ignition interlock device installed on your vehicle for about a year. Your license is going to be suspended for 90 days. If you blew over a 0.15, and just a reminder, the above the legal limit is a 0.08, then there are harsher penalties. So even if it's your first time, if you blew over the 0.15, it would be 2 days of jail, a higher fine. I want to say like around $1,200. Your license is suspended for longer, etc. If God forbid you pick up another DUI in the next 7 years, you're looking at like 30 days in jail. It gets pretty hardcore pretty quickly.
Because then you get into like felony territory. In Idaho, you get into like felony territory, second offense territory. And it's the same thing. And for like the 1 day in jail for like a first offense DUI, that's like you get booked in jail, you get arrested, you get booked in jail. If you bond out that same night or maybe the next morning, that counts as a single day in jail. Like that counts as a credit
Not
for 1
for
day.
us. It has to be 24
What?
hours. Yeah.
Your credit for time in all of your cases is a full 24 hours.
No, dude, but just for the mandatory minimums for the DUIs. Typically, there's good time. So just like a third of your sentence gets shaved off. But when you're dealing with the DUI man-mins, it has to be a consecutive 24 hours for you to get credit.
I don't think that's the thing in Idaho. I think most people like can bond out the next morning for a DUI.
Well, I mean, not that you can't bond out. It's just that when you resolve the case, if you want to have had your credit applied,
you have to go serve.
Right. If you didn't serve a consecutive 24 hours.
I don't think Idaho.
So it's like it
that.
might be in your interest to just like not bail out. I mean, I guess it just depends, right?
Okay.
I mean, for a day, like if it's going to be 24 hours, right? If you're like almost there.
I don't think Idaho has that. And like now I'm feeling like I'm committing malpractice because I'm like, do all of my clients have to serve 24 hours? Because what?
Typically, I'll try to resolve the case with like an amended charge if we can't get it dismissed. So like kind of going down the line, like I think of DUIs as the most severe. And then I think about reckless driving, which here is still a gross misdemeanor, meaning the maximum penalty is up to 364 days in jail and or a $5,000 fine.
What?
That's a gross misdemeanor. A DUI is a gross misdemeanor. Reckless driving is also a gross misdemeanor. But with reckless driving, you don't have any of the mandatory minimums, and it's only 30 days of license suspension. Going down the line, then you have like negligent driving first degree, which is just a misdemeanor. So 90 days and a $1,000 fine, no mandatory minimums, no license suspension. So it's just like trying to negotiate, down the line.
Yeah. I mean, reckless is definitely higher than like inattentive or anything like that here. But it seems like Washington's pretty heavy on DUI charging. I am not. And like other driving offenses.
Yeah. They do not mess around.
Don't drink and drive or do drugs and drive in Washington.
Right.
Don't do it, apparently.
Well, what happened to our girl, Lindsay? Did she plead to a DUI or was it amended to a lesser charge?
So Lindsay had a little bit of a rough go. I'm not going to lie. She pled guilty to misdemeanor cocaine use and DUI, and she was sentenced to 1 day in jail and 10 days of community service. And then she was placed on 3 years probation, which that's kind of uncommon in Idaho.
A long time.
Right. So she got 3 years probation. And then after that, here's kind of what I was saying about her release and then kind of her case playing out the way that is typical for some DUI cases. So she pled and then she spent a whopping 84 minutes in the Linwood, California jail before being released due to overcrowding. There was a warrant that was issued to her arrest that was a warrant was ordered in 2009, so 2 years after the DUI was resolved. And the judge issued a $50,000 warrant related to the DUI. And then it was rescinded 3 days later after her attorney showed that she'd been complying with the terms of her probation. Then there was something procedurally odd. Later that same year, the judge in her DUI case extended her probation for an additional 12 months so that she could complete her court-ordered alcohol education program, which, as you said, common in cases in Washington, extremely common in cases in Idaho. Usually have to do like victims impact panel and ADIS. And then the following year, her probation was revoked and a bench warrant was issued after she skipped a court date. So she failed to appear.
God, Lindsay, so messy.
Yeah. And she went to the Cannes Film Festival instead. And then she said she couldn't get back because her passport was stolen. So the judge set her bail at $100,000, which she then paid to get released. And then this was the one that was most interesting. So at some point she gets an ankle monitor put on her in 2010. She had her bail. The judge found her in violation of probation again in 2010, and her bail was set at $200,000, and a new bench warrant was issued because her ankle monitor, pinned her for being at a party related to the MTV Movie Awards. The warrant was then subsequently recalled after a bail bondsman covered her bond. Later that same year, she was sentenced to 90 days in jail for failing to appear in court again, not appear in court, for failing to attend her court-ordered weekly alcohol education courses.
Wow.
Miss Lohan then eventually surrendered in 2010 and ended up serving 2 weeks. Again, she didn't have to serve longer because of prison overcrowding and the nonviolent nature of her crime, which is interesting. I think sometimes judges and prosecutors will say that DUIs they'll try to make the argument for it being violent because you're putting people in danger or, be harmful to people's well-being. Later in 2010, her probation was revoked after she failed a drug test and they found cocaine in her system. She then got released from jail and went to rehab. Yeah, she had this. I know where this is. So she went to rehab. She went to Betty Ford, which is a pretty big rehabilitation center in like the Palm Springs area. And she had, I think, some sort of altercation with a staff member there. I think charges were related to that. Those charges were later dropped. Yes. And then
she assaulted a staff member at rehab?
I think so. And then allegedly. And then in 2011, she was taken back into custody after pleading not guilty to a necklace theft. It just kind of goes on and on and on. And so basically her probation in the DUI case, she completed officially in 2012, which is a long time after the case originally started in 2007, I believe. So,
dude,
yeah,
God,
yeah, and so she had to serve. I think she got ordered as all of that was playing out. I think there was another court determination that she was needed to do 120 days in jail and 480 hours of community service. And then the necklace thing turned into a misdemeanor and there was another bail slip. And so, yeah, there was another case that involved sideswiping a person with her car and just a lot happened. What? And so the point I wanted to make with her case and to just kind of humanize it, I mean, it's a little bit bananas. This case got dragged out as long as it did. And so much attention was on it. And she's just, been painted in this light. The point that's so interesting about her case, I mean, first and foremost, I think it's really important to point out that DUIs are extremely common.
Oh, yeah.
Any type of driving and influence cases is common. DUIs, DWIs, public intoxication charges, alcohol and drug cases are really, really common. I mean, George W. Bush had an old DUI. Dick Cheney had an old DUI or something related to that.
For sure. The one thing that unites the rich and poor 100% is DUIs.
And I saw this list and it had like 2 judges who've had DUIs from like other states and stuff too. So, it's a wide swath in terms of the typical defendant in a DUI case. It could be anybody. The thing that's so interesting about Lindsay Lohan's case is that I think it's a really honest picture of just like how complicated they can be, not just DUIs, but especially DUIs, to just get it done.
Yeah.
Probation's not easy. People are like, oh, you're not in jail. You just have to comply with probation. Probation's not that easy, especially if you're on supervised probation or, wearing an ankle monitor or ordered to do a ridiculous amount of community service or, in Idaho, people being ordered to do sheriff's labor program or whatever it may be. Then you have these other requirements of completing treatment, getting a substance abuse evaluation done. Like, then if you don't do those things by the timeline, then you get a probation violation and it just goes on and on and on and on and on.
And that all takes time and money. And what do so many clients not have?
Time and money.
Time or money. They're fucking working, but barely getting by or like trying to just, it's brutal, dude.
And it's just hard because I find myself in court constantly, say they had a DUI or whatever other case, but for this purpose, a DUI, then they get a probation violation and we're back in court for the probation violation. And the probation violation is because they didn't do one of these things, or maybe they picked up additional charges, but then flagged a probation violation, whatever it may be. And your clients are explaining to you just their life. And there's all sorts of reasons that make these hurdles that they have to jump through hard. And who is on top of their stuff enough to like keep track of, I have to get this submitted to the court by this time. Hopefully your attorney is taking care of that and tracking that for you. But, stuff goes through the cracks all the time with people's lives or just caseloads, whatever it may be. So hope that's going on. Then people, if they have like high levels of, treatment that they're required to do, say they're like in intensive outpatient treatment or partial hospitalization. And maybe I should kind of lay some foundation for that. Oftentimes, if people have like an alcohol or a drug charge, they have to get a substance abuse evaluation done. And those are incredibly invasive usually as well, because they go into things about a person's history, tolerance, diagnoses they may have, all of these things that are considered predisposers for substance abuse of any kind. So then they go and they get this evaluation done. And they're also in this point again of having to be like honest and forthright or whatever. And then from that comes the recommended level of treatment. And then in Idaho, it's like the condition when you go to sentencing is get the evaluation done and complete the recommended level of treatment. So at that point, sometimes people don't really know what hopefully you get your substance abuse evaluation done before you go to sentencing. So you know what your client is committing to. That should be best practice because your substance abuse evaluation will tell you what level of treatment the client is needing so that a client is not just going to be blindsided and say, I didn't know that this is what I was needing to do and go over that with them, right? But say they have this really high level of recommended treatment, they're then signing up for all of these things. They are incredibly time consuming. Factor in trying to have a job to pay for things like housing or just basic needs. And maybe they have a family, all of these things, or maybe they picked up a charge in a state they don't live in. So they're having to go out of their way to go to court someplace else. And it's just a lot. Lindsay Lohan's case is really not that different than a normal non-celebrity person because yes, there were some outliers in terms of her not having to spend a lot of time in jail. And yes, like all of these other things. But like, come on, like how many cases just get drug out because life happens to people who happen to have a case that they're working on throughout the court. And then it just turns into this snowball. And I think that it's easy to laugh at because it seems kind of ridiculous, but it's also just the reality of she's not that different than anybody I would meet in court on any given day. And so that's why I wanted to talk about her case because it seems ridiculous. And sometimes the best learning is through something that's a little bit comical, but then just to bring it back down, it's pretty normal. So That's my thought. And for that, I love Lindsay Lohan. And I think that she's a person who has had a run of it and who hasn't.
On that note, I hope that everybody will join us for our next episode. Thanks so much. Cheers.
Cheers.